All right, we are live.
Okay. Hello, welcome everyone to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Budget Community Engagement Session. Today, we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about our budget. First, we're going to present it, and then we will gather your feedback. We're Schools Budget Community Engagement Session. So, whoops. Okay, so while you're on with us today, please log into Mentimeter. That's how we'll be able to see your questions and your comments. All you can do it on a phone or on your computer. Go to www.menti.com and enter the code 86220488. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Superintendent Winston.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you for that. And I want to take an opportunity to welcome everyone once again to the first of two community engagement sessions following the budget recommendation that staff made to the board last week. And so really tonight's workshop is designed to get your feedback on our budget proposal that was shared with the board last week. And this budget covers what we believe is necessary to improve student outcomes. And we built the budget with three strategies in mind. And those strategies are, we must be focused on what we will do to improve student outcomes and the objectives that the board set forward in its goals and guardrails. Number two, the cases that we have made for new investments or existing investments had to enable us to deliver on what we are promising. And then lastly, the investments must clearly align to the board's priorities in the goals and guardrails. Next slide. So how are we funded? And I'd like to just be able to share with you where the district's funding comes from and how it's used. So this particular slide shows our budget by sources and usage. The majority of our funds come from the state and they're used for salaries and benefits. If I were to say that another way, the majority of our budget is state funded and it's used for staffing. I do think it's important to note that CMS, we receive our funding in the form of staffing allotments. What you'll see in the orange portion of the pie chart is that we get funding here from our county partners. And these funds are more flexible than some of our other funding sources. You'll also see federal funds and grants and other special revenue as funding sources as well. I think the takeaway or the headline, if you will, from this slide is that most of our budget is tied directly to people. Next slide, please. So what we know is this. We know that we must improve outcomes for students during a time when families and students have lived through the impact and trauma of a global pandemic. We see the evidence of trauma reflected in the social and emotional responses, in the behaviors that some of our students are exhibiting. And we also know that we have access to one-time federal funding. And that one-time federal funding allows us the opportunity to invest in areas that we may not have been able to before. And so what I know is that a return to the pre-COVID normal, that is not our goal. Next slide. So where are we going? We also know that the status quo is not acceptable for us. It's not acceptable for our families, nor our students, our staff, and members of our community. I think the data clearly shows that the outcomes demonstrate a clear need for change. And so our goal, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but our goal is to help prepare our students to not only just survive, but our goal is to help our students thrive in CMS, but also when they leave us. And so when they leave us, they must be equipped in order to be able to succeed, whether that means going into a career or furthering their education. But it's a priority to increase the opportunities for all students in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, particularly our Black and Hispanic students, two groups that have historically been underserved. And so next slide. So right now we have a unique opportunity in this particular moment for everyone. When I say everyone, I mean our students, our families, our community members, our faith partners, our business leaders, to be able to come together and change how we approach public education. And this, we believe, is the only way that we will see improved results for all students in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools.
I'd like to share a quick reminder with our community. Again, you can ask questions on Mentimeter. You can post them at any point during this presentation, and we'll do our best to answer them for you today. Thanks.
Okay. And Ms. Jones, do we want to pause to see if there are any questions, or shall I keep moving forward?
I'll let you know when there are questions. There are none so far.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, with that, we can move to the next slide. So how do we move forward? So there are some non-negotiables that dictate exactly how we move forward. And we know that we're going to wait for questions. I think we will need to remove what we have. So the audience, okay, wonderful, wonderful. So what you see on the screen now are 4 goals. You know, these are the goals that the Board of Education recently approved. I will not read them verbatim to you, but earlier I spoke about the goals that were approved by the board, and these are the goals here. These are the outcomes that our board is holding our staff and myself accountable for achieving. Next slide. So how we plan to leverage the COVID funds for the next 2 years, I want to speak briefly about that. So we're very fortunate to have access to federal funds. And I think one of the misconceptions is that we can use these funds for almost anything that we want. And that's simply not true. These dollars have allowable uses that have to be approved. And so this request, this budget recommendation reflects our plans to leverage our COVID funding to the greatest extent possible within those allowable uses. And what is important to know here is that anything and everything that we use COVID funding for is temporary, and that there is the risk of a funding cliff at the end of the time frame in which those dollars are to be used. And so we're looking to use some of these funds to prove concepts, if you will, that we believe will turn the tide for students. This funding, it's important to note, it gives us the opportunity to test some things that we haven't had funding to try. And so when we learn from these, what I will call proof concepts, we can and we will actually make the case for continuing the program or a particular strategy or the staffing associated with those dollars. Next slide. And so actually what you will see here and on the next two slides after this one is how we plan to use the COVID federal dollars over the next 2 years. And so what I did want to share with you is that so here you'll see the pie chart on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you will actually see the actual COVID grants and specified purposes for these dollars. And so I won't read all of these for you, but I did want to acknowledge, some of the COVID-related funds that we are receiving. Next slide. Okay, on this particular slide, you'll see on the left-hand side some of the categories that we're funding, such as health and safety, staffing, summer programming, academics, student wellness and academic support, and grant administration. And that totals approximately $72 million. Okay, the next slide, please. And so what you see here shows how we have allocated the largest amount of the ARP, which is American Recovery Program funding. And you'll see how we've allocated that on this particular slide. I'll give you a moment just to look at that before we move to the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. What we want to show here is how this year's budget proposal builds on previous investments that also support the goals that we shared earlier in the presentation. And so our investment in the instructional core has included several things. They include the instructional tools in the curriculum, professional learning for our principals, instructional leaders, and teachers. It also includes an assessment management system, as well as support for effective practices related to instructional expectations, school scheduling, and differentiated instruction. We have a partnership with Equal Opportunity Schools designed to increase the number and types of students in our district who are taking at advanced level courses. Also, you'll see here extended learning opportunities, and those include things such as tutoring during and after school, as well as summer and after school learning opportunities. Also, access to college level courses. That includes professional learning for Cambridge, international baccalaureate, as well as advanced placement teachers. It also includes alignment of our career and technical education to our college and career pathways at Central Piedmont Community College. We also have a focus on equity in the district. And here we share information about equity-focused professional development. What does that mean? Culturally relevant curriculum, as well as addressing biases that may lead sometimes to lower expectations for our Black and Hispanic students. These investments are all interconnected, and all of these are designed to contribute to the larger goal. Next slide. We know that our students deserve to be in safe facilities that provide optimal learning environments. And so here are some of the ways in which we provide those optimal learning environments through our HVAC optimization, our needlepoint bipolar ionization, designed to help improve the air quality in our buildings, exhaust fans, MERV 10 filters, as well as chillers. Next slide. So all of our students, they absolutely deserve to be challenged, and they deserve to be stretched through exposure to and success in advanced coursework. And so, you know, it is not just about having more options for students. It's about having expanded options and providing those supports and direction to our students so that they can be empowered to pursue areas that they are interested in. Next slide, please. Okay. And so one of the things that you know, I like to emphasize is that our teachers, our educators are the most critical element of a student's academic experience. And, you know, while I will share with you that while finding great teachers, highly effective teachers has always been a challenge, not only for Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, but districts across this country. This year, in particular, has been the challenge because our vacancies have made it very difficult to help all of our students catch up after they have lost so much instructional time due to the pandemic. So really making those investments in critical shortage pay and recruitment bonuses, that was important for us to do. And once we have the teachers, we need to be able to provide them the supports that they need to deliver instruction effectively. And I will say this, that you know, while we are continuing to provide the professional development for our educators, we recognize that our teachers benefit from the development and support inside of their buildings. And so it's because of that that we're investing in the development of our teacher leaders within our schools to be able to build on the support provided centrally. And so we do that through our teacher leader pathway program, where professional development for our TLP, that's teacher leader pathway for short, school-based positions, managing our TLP talent pools. And they do that by screening applicants, also assisting schools with designing their staffing plans, and also being able to monitor schools throughout the year to ensure that the positions are being used with fidelity. And so next slide, please. And so our English learners, you know, I want to just clear up and provide some clarity around our English learners. They include both our Black and our Hispanic students, but it's important to note that they are not exclusively Black and Hispanic. And so our English learners speak more than 100 different languages. And that is something that we are extremely proud of as a district, the level of diversity that we have amongst our students. For our students who are new to the community, new to public education in this country, and are learning English, we're proposing to onboard those students in our what we're calling for now our personalized academic command of English Global Academy. That is PACE for short, and I know it is a mouthful, but if this proposal recommendation is approved, then we will find a formal name for this Global Academy. But what this means is that our students will have increased access to educators and programs that are designed to get them prepared to access the standard course of study that is offered by the state of North Carolina. Next slide. So we believe that maintaining two-way communication between our families and our educators is absolutely critical to being able to help our families engage their students in schools, in our classroom. And so we're proposing a Family Connect tool that will help us to better maintain those relationships with our families. Social and emotional learning instruction and the integration of SEL strategies in every content area enables us to be able to gain those interpersonal skills, allow our students to gain those interpersonal skills, which are so important to help them manage themselves and their learning. And so this includes both the continued support of the selected curriculum, coaching on SEL curriculum implementation, as well as SEL integration across the content areas. Next slide, please. So in order to guarantee the consistency and, quite frankly, the accountability of implementation of the MTSS in our schools, and MTSS, by the way, is multi-tiered systems of support. But in order to be able to guarantee the consistency and the accountability, we are proposing a structure to support this strategy. And so you may be asking, well, what's the impact on our students with this particular investment? And once we have their specific academic needs identified through the diagnostic tool, and this is a tool, by the way, that identifies students' needs so that we can be able to match the intervention to their specific needs. But once we've identified those needs through the diagnostic tool, our students will be engaging with interventionists who have training on specific strategies that give them that extra support that they need in order to be able to meet the rigor in their classrooms. And I will also say that an integral portion of this investment is to create those structures that drive the accountability for work in all of our schools across the district. So in addition to funding the diagnostic tool, we are proposing a director, facilitators, as well as interventionists. Next slide, please. And I think we will pause for questions. Ms. Jones, I think you are on mute.
Yes, I am. Okay. Oh, come on. Okay, great. Sorry about that. For those of you who are interested in asking questions, you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 86220488. And that way we'll see the questions. You'll have the opportunity to upvote questions that you like from other folks. And so that's really the best way to communicate your questions at this point in time. But now I can stop and share a few questions that have been raised so far. The first is about the amount of funding that goes to staff. So this is going way back to the pie chart near the beginning. They say, could you talk about 77% of the funding of the funding going to staff?
Ms. Shirley, I was going to, and I see you have come off mute.
Yes, I believe this was in regards to the pie chart, which outlined the sources of our funding and the uses. And I think Superintendent Winston did highlight that 77% of our funding is used for salaries and benefits. So directly to staff, yes, in the form of their salaries and or their benefits. That was the combination of both the salaries and the benefits for staffing.
Okay. Let's see. Another is, how is the budget for talent development at Highland Renaissance Academy being utilized? What services are rendered to students?
Ms. Jones, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question, please.
Okay. And I will say that typically we don't comment on particular schools, but the question is, how is the budget for talent development being utilized? What services are rendered to students? And that could be a question that we respond to, that we get feedback on and respond to another time. Okay.
Agreed.
Okay, the next question is, what types of research has CMS conducted regarding the positives and negatives of a broad range of virtual and hybrid modalities for students moving forward?
I'm going to ask, and I don't know that we have conducted research internally, but we do follow some best practices across the country in terms of which grade levels have typically fared better in in-person learning. And I would turn to members of our academics team to be able to share any insights on that end.
Thank you for that question. We haven't done our own research internally around hybrid or virtual learning. However, we do read a lot of research around best practices for students that are typically in upper elementary, middle, or high school grades, do better with virtual or hybrid learning scenarios.
Great. So our next question is probably for EC department, which is help us understand how the funding for kids with autism and other special needs works.
Thank you for that question. So we do have funding set aside for students who are identified with special needs, and that funding goes to allocate teachers to teach these students, both while they're accessing the general education content, as well as funding instruction related to their IEP goals. So a student with special needs would have a special IEP team meeting to identify their needs and write goals for them. And then funding is allocated to meet all of their instructional needs. And in some cases, it also includes related services like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, but there is funding allocated for students who are identified with special needs.
Great. The next one is a question about the portion of the budget that gives people, that helps our students become financially literate. And also about African American studies, sign language, and public speaking. So that's a lot, but you can see it on the screen as well.
So I just want to respond to this question. We do not have that. We do not have the budget broken down to these specific criterias based on the very specific nature of each of these programs that we have and cost figures for this evening. If that's something that we need to look into, we definitely can.
I think we can save, we're getting quite a few. What I think we should do is actually go through the rest of the presentation and then come back to the questions at the end. And for those of you in Mentimeter, feel free to upload questions that you're interested in so that we can make sure we get the most critical ones answered.
All right. Thank you for that, Ms. Jones. So what did we realign? What did we realign to get us to this point? So what I want to share with you all on the next slide is a summary of our strategic investments. And you will see those highlighted on the left-hand side. And you'll see how those strategic investments break down in terms of county and federal funding, and in the very right-hand corner, the total amount of new funding. And we start with at the very top in that left-hand column under strategic investment, preventive maintenance and indoor air quality. We talk about our new early college high school. Again, these are proposals in our budget. College and career coaches. We talk about the critical shortage pay and incentives, particularly in the areas of math, science, and exceptional children. And I won't read the entire list, but you'll notice that the total amount of new funding required is just under $4.9 million. Okay. Next slide, please. And so I want to spend just a moment talking about our county budget request, which is on the next slide. So the request, so the federal funding, I should say, is being used to the maximum extent possible within those allowable uses. And I talked a little bit about that earlier, but those allowable uses, they allow us to support the recovery from the pandemic. And some of those strategic investments are long-term needs. They're not just short-term needs, short-term COVID recovery needs, I should say. And so what you see on this particular slide are some highlights of the long-term investments that our COVID funds cannot be used for. Next slide, please. So beginning on this slide and for the next several slides, you'll see what are the things that are driving our budgets, or as we call them, budget drivers. And so safety remains, has always been, and it remains a priority for our district. And I'm not just referring to physical safety, but I'm also talking about psychological safety. And so you'll see on this slide the addition of school resource officers, as well as some increases in our current contracts. Also, you'll see here staffing for our counselors and DSS liaisons and other staff members. Next slide. Thank you. Investment in our employees. There are a number of items listed on this particular slide that show the investments in our employees. Some are state-driven salary increases. Also, phase one of a market-driven adjustments for our teacher assistants to make or bring their minimum pay up to $16.50 per hour for all TAs or teacher assistants. And then also the item on this particular slide that has the largest price tag, and I think rightfully so, is a proposed local supplement for our teachers and certified staff to the tune of a 10% increase in that supplement. And then you'll also see funding for retirement and health insurance rate increases. Next slide, please. You'll also see here on this particular slide, student growth and additional space coming online in our upcoming school year are another budget driver. You'll note the charter school enrollment growth, but we also have a couple of new schools and some additional facility space. We have a new elementary school that will open in the southeast part of the county, and we also have a new high school that will open in the southwest part of the county, Palisades High School. And so that requires additional staffing, as well as maintenance and operating costs for those new facilities that will bring with it additional square footage. Next slide, please. Okay, so what you see here is our 22-23 proposed county appropriation. You'll note toward the bottom of the slide that in terms of realignment of our existing resources to our strategic initiatives, we have realigned approximately $6.4 million, which would make our proposed county appropriation just under $580 million. And if you're keeping track, that represents approximately a $41 million change from the prior year appropriation. Next slide, please. Awesome. And so we are approaching the end, but what you see outlined here is our total budget, our operating, our capital, as well as our enterprise divisions that we refer to as child nutrition or school nutrition, as well as ASAP, which is the after school enrichment program, which includes our before and after-school programs. This includes our budget with our federal COVID funds, and it also includes that budget, what that looks like without those federal COVID-related funds. Next slide, please. And Ms. Jones, I'm going to turn it on over to you.
Okay, so now we're at the point where we can go back to some of the questions you asked earlier and continue with the questions that are coming in. We really appreciate you sharing so much. So the first question is, will CMS be recalculating allotments for schools to get more teachers in the buildings and reduce class sizes, which could address student learning loss?
Thank you for the question. We will be reallocating our or recalculating the allotments for the schools based on the enrollment that is projected for the school for the next year. And in addition, there will be an additional 170 positions that we will use our COVID-related funding for to provide additional support in schools to specifically address the learning loss and the challenges that we are experiencing with learning loss for next year.
Next question is, why don't these investments, why can't we see the investments for Title IX? Or what are the investments for Title IX?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Jones. So you'll note that so some of our strategies around Title IX both include funding and several of our strategies do not necessarily require us to invest additional dollars. And so what we have is our ability through some creative use of funding. And again, this is I want to acknowledge how Ms. Shirley and her team has found ways to be creative with our dollars to be able to utilize those for existing needs. And so through looking at our current budget and funds that are available, we are able to make some existing investments in Title IX staff through that creativity. And so again, those some of those investments and strategies will require funding, and then there are some that quite frankly do not require, but will include some realignment.
Great, thanks. Next one is, the proposed pay increases for staff don't keep up with the 7.9% rate of inflation. What increases to pay rates will the district consider in order not to give us a technical pay cut? Would somebody like to address the question about increases, staff increase? Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah. What I would be able to add to this is that the 2.5% increase that is proposed for non-certified and the average 2.7% that is proposed for teachers and our other certified staff is in alignment with what the state approved increases are as of this moment. We are in the second year, or about to go into for next year, the second year of the biennial budget that the state approved earlier this fall. And that is the increases that the state has indicated that we will be able to provide. The majority of our staffing is state funded. And so our pay increases are typically aligned to those that the state will provide for state paid staff. What I will add to that is that in recognition that we still have challenges with the competitiveness of our salaries, Superintendent Winston mentioned a couple of key initiatives for next year, one being the local supplement that all teachers and certified staff in the district receive. We are proposing a 10% increase to that supplement amount. And then secondly, as a first phase to addressing some of the market pay challenges that we are facing, we are proposing a $1.50 increase per hour for all of our teacher assistants. So those are two key areas that are being lifted in this budget proposal in order to address some of the challenges with our competitive pay.
Along with that, there's a question about how, kind of given that experience, how are we going to keep experienced teachers in the classroom?
So I think one of the initiatives that you saw that was based in this budget under great teaching is definitely the focus on the professional development that teachers need to meet the individual needs of our students. We've also made sure that as we've gone through this budget process, we brought STAC, which represents their teachers across the district. They've been involved in several aspects of the work that's being done to make sure that we are deploying services directly to the school level to make sure that our teachers have every resource that they need in order to meet the individual needs of our students. We believe that that's a solid strategy to make sure that our teachers understand that they are supported and they are in a profession and in an organization that values their expertise to all of our students across the district.
And I would just add that we are also looking at ways to bolster our retention, not only through pay that Ms. Shirley just answered, but also through things that we are doing throughout the district, such as our wellness initiative, creating a group of wellness ambassadors from schools and throughout the district to talk about what ways we can support wellness for our teachers and our other staff, whether that's mental health, financial health, physical health. That's just one way of kind of building some culture and building in some benefits for our employees to let them know that we care about them and want to make sure that they do stay with us.
Okay, thanks. Another question is why, let's see, 11 million of CRRS and ESER2 funding is for staffing, while only 7.6 million is for academics. Why are the adults in the room getting more than addressing learning loss?
Julie, I can jump in a little bit on that since it's the federal funding. So the 11 million that's set aside for staffing on that particular grant is specifically allocated for the COVID enhancement teacher positions that Ms. Shirley mentioned earlier. And so the intent there is to put more student-facing staff in our schools to help with learning loss. So really very much related to learning loss in similar ways to academics as well. And then in addition to that, there are a number of learning loss related items that are also allocated on the American Rescue Plan or ESSER 3 grant, ranging from things like tutoring to a variety of other strategies.
So I think, okay, so I think that is the end of the questions that we have right now for regarded specifically to the budget. So next, we'd like to give you all a chance to share, why is it doing that? We'd like to give you all a chance to share your thoughts on how we might strengthen the budget proposal. So feel free to enter that in Mentimeter. We'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, we'll also look at the comments in the chat to know what's important to you. And so I'm going to move on. We have a poll next. And what we'd like to know from, I'm sorry, hold on. What we'd like to know from you is are your opinions about the budget. To what degree are you in support of it? Thank you for taking a few moments to share, let us know kind of what you're thinking about the budget process. I'm going to pass it back to Ernest about what's coming up next, or to Superintendent Winston about what's happening next.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jones. And so what you have on the screen before you is a schedule for the next steps and some of the key dates in our budget process. You will see that we have a budget work session. Our Board of Education has that scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. That will be followed on Thursday by the second of our community engagement sessions. Again, on Thursday, March the 31st. And then there's also a public hearing scheduled for our next board meeting next week, Tuesday, on April the 5th, which will be followed by the Board of Education vote on the proposed budget at the last meeting in April, which is scheduled for April the 26th. And you'll see a few other dates, but I wanted to highlight those key upcoming dates that are a part of our budget process. And so, next slide, please. And we simply want to say thank you. I appreciate your feedback that you've provided. And as I mentioned earlier, during this presentation, we have a unique opportunity to build an education experience for your children, for our children, that we believe will yield better results. And so we are asking you to join us in advocating on behalf of all of our students. And with that, I want to say thank you all again for giving up your time this evening. And we look forward to seeing you participate in some of the upcoming opportunities as part of this budget process. I also want to thank staff for their role in tonight's budget community work session. Thank you all, and hope you have a good evening.